I want to go to car shows, but my car's boring. So today, I'm making Car 2D2. Here we go. For this build, I used craft foam, floor mat foam, half cylinder foam, clay foam, coffee foam, putty, super glue, hot glue, contact cement, silver rubbing buff, sanding implements, safety gear, scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter. I'll be using car magnets for this, but unfortunately, I built them into my Thor hammers. Thanks, Kate Blanchett. First, I made a pattern for the dome off of this 12-inch styrofoam dome. This is 6 inches too small, so I'm gonna pull a template from it and make it bigger. The actual R2s are a little bit more than 18 inches in diameter, 18 1/4, but that's wildly impractical for day-to-day use. So I'm gonna knock a few inches off of that, knowing that it's gonna look the same anyway. However, it still has to be bigger than this. More on that in a bit. I wrapped the dome in foil, and then taped the individual foil pieces together. All right, now I gotta cover it with duct tape, and I think I have the perfect kind. I enthusiastically wrapped the dome, but quickly came to a harsh realization. You don't really want to use tape with any kind of images on it when you're patterning, because they'll make it harder to see the registration marks. Yeah, so you know what, I'm calling it. I'm gonna switch to a tape that is gonna show up better on camera, like classic gray. So I covered half the dome in gray duct tape, and then I outlined the rim in Sharpie and divided the dome into halves across the top. Then I divided it into quarters, and finally eighths. After that, I drew registration marks. Then I cut off the excess foil and tape, wrapped beneath the rim, and removed the pattern. I cut the dome in half, and got rid of the part with the theme tape on it. And then cut out the pattern, making sure to cut the little hash marks as well. These will be used to line the dome later. Then I flattened the tape pattern, and transferred it to cardboard by tracing it with a Sharpie. I made sure to include all the registration marks. Those are incredibly important, and it's super easy to forget them. Then I cut it out. I labeled this as a 12-inch dome pattern, which might be useful later for some future build. But as I said before, that's going to be too small for R2, so I used it as a base to figure out a larger one. See, this whole scale concern is because astromechs take up a massive amount of floor space, depending on the situation. That's why I usually build battle droids and BD-1s. Those can fold up and store easily. I was able to justify Chopper being so big because his head is flat, so he doubles as an end table. So I'm aiming for just shy of a standard diameter, say 15 or 16 inches. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but it'll make the droid infinitely more manageable. When I landed on the shape that I wanted, I traced it onto foam, taking care to include the registration marks, those little triangles. Those will be instrumental in helping me line up the edges. I cut those out with the work knife, which I continually sharpened in order to keep the cut clean and uniform. I'm also being careful to make sure that my blade is angled perfectly straight up and down. This will prevent any ridges or depressions from forming in the foam after I join the two sides. You should be able to fit all four on one floor mat, but I build with foam all the time, so I don't have a single complete floor mat. That's embarrassing. I cut out all the pieces with a sharpened box cutter, especially for the middle cut because it's really difficult to sand in there. In fact, if you have scalpels, that'd be like the best tool to use on foam, but they're really delicate, you know, they snap easy. The outer edge I was able to sand smooth on my belt sander. Then I heat formed them using my heat gun. This softens the foam up, making it malleable. When it was sufficiently heated up, I pressed it over half of a giant novelty Easter egg that I'm using as a planishing iron, or anvil, to help shape the foam into a curved piece. Then I turned the Easter egg upside down, set it on a tape spool to keep it upright, and placed a piece inside to cool. I weighted that down with a metal machinist block, but any weight will do, really. 20 minutes later, it was cool and would retain its shape. Now it's time to glue. Be sure to mask up. Cans open and mask on. And now I'm gonna cut to voiceover Jake, so you don't have to listen to my robot voice. Thanks, Robot Jake, Jake Vader. I applied the contact cement to each edge that would eventually be contacted. As I went, I was careful to spread it, not glob it on. Then I set it aside to dry for 12.5 minutes. Then I contacted the seams. I try to do this one first, like this end of the seam first, so that it's the first to dry, because just the nature of, you know, gravity and surface tension always draws a blob of glue down there that takes longer to dry. Okay, we get it. Nobody needs to listen to Robot Jake. I repeated that step for the other pieces. Then I glued the seams in between the pieces and connected them all together to form a dome. Oh, what'd you do, Jake? What'd you do? Did you rush your template tracing? Yeah, you rushed your template tracing. For me, working with EVA foam is a combination of math and sculpture. The more math you put in, the less sculpture you have to do. I clearly should have put in just a tiny bit more math, but luckily, the nature of the medium means that you can correct it with just a little bit more sculpture. I cut out 1/4 of an inch of foam in order to make that work. That's fascinating. That means that the width of the Sharpie was 1/32 of an inch, and that's what threw me off. Noted, buy thin-tip Sharpies. Or pencils. What are we doing? Right, droid smithing. Although contact cement has a 15-minute working time, I like to give it a day to air out before taking it back inside to work on, because the fumes are not great to breathe. Alright, I know how to fix that, but before I do, I'm going to have to reheat form it, which will even out all the lumps, making it a more perfect dome. Once that's done, then I can do all the details and internal supports. And then adding circles. These are actually packaging foam from some camera part. Occasionally you find EVA foam in the wild. I traced them and then cut a circle out of the top just so that the foam's tension was the same on every panel. Not sure that's necessary, but I did it, so here it is. And there we go. And that's how to make the world's ugliest lampshade. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Kidding, look at how much time is left in the video. I super glued the panels on, then I made some internal framework to keep the dome shaped. This is actually a little bit overkill. It was only necessary to do this for the top 4 inches because that's where the defect was. But I didn't find that out until much later, and the whole point I was using this foam in here is that it's garbage foam. I was looking for an excuse to get rid of it. I cut them to interlock, glued them inside, and then moved on to the details. Okay, so I made cardboard templates, actually reverse engineered them from one of the original panels, right about there. And because there's only 6 of them instead of 8, those 2 missing panels make up the space in between. I traced those with a Sharpie and then removed them. I placed them onto a sheet of 2mm blue craft foam, weighted them down with various machinist blocks, and then traced them with a blue Sharpie. I cut them out and then super glued them on. When they were all on, I moved on to the main eye detail. I cut it out of a blue floor mat. It's deceptively angular. It's not a perfect square, which means it dulls out my blade real easily, and yielded some jagged cuts. Plus, when you angle a blade, you're cutting through more material. So I sanded those smooth on the belt sander. Then I traced a circle for the eye using a soldering spool, just because, a lot of these decisions are made based on what's in arm's reach. And I cut it out. Again, jagged cut. And again, belt sander. Nope. That opening was too small for the belt sander, so I smoothed it out with the rotary tool. I pulled a template off of that freehand piece and then duplicated it in order to make it the correct depth. For the lens of the eye, I cut up a blank holiday ornament. Then I painted the inside black. I also painted the blue backing black just to prevent it from showing through. When the paint dried, I placed the lens over the black portion and then glued the frame onto the backing. I sliced the space floppy disk port into the frame and then heated it up with my heat gun in order to get it to open up and be more visible. There are these faux hinge details, which I made out of 4mm blue craft foam strips. The seam on the top was bugging me, so I hit that with 2mm craft foam. I also sanded the diamond pattern off the back so that it would lie flush against the dome. I even carved out a little cavity in there, in the center there. Then I glued it to the dome with super glue. Next, I puttied the seams with DAP Alex Fast Dry. This dome was looking a bit too squat for me, so while I waited for the sealant to dry, I cut 2 strips from a floor mat tile, heat formed them, and attached them to the bottom of the dome to give it a little bit extra height. Then I made all the little blue panels that go around the outside edge, made those out of 2mm foam. When they were finished, I moved on to the hologram projector lenses. Pretty sure they're airplane vents, the overhead vent jets, but I don't want to get on the no-fly list for taking apart airplanes again. So instead, I made those out of cat toys, which again happened to be EVA foam. Who knew? I think Bill and Odin. I cut those in half. I placed 3 of them around the dome and added a strip of half-cylinder EVA bevel around the outside edge. For the lenses, I drilled holes in bottle caps and then widened them with a narrow rotary tool bit. I put in a foam backing and then attached those with super glue. There are these tiny display windows in one of the panels, so I cut those with the razor pen. There are also lens holes in various places around the perimeter, so I drilled those with pipes. This is actually not part of my hole cutting set, these are just random pipes, but I was able to use the smaller pipes for these small holes on the back. With all the details finished, I was finally able to paint. I started with a layer of flat black because the first layer always gets absorbed into the foam. Flat black dries pretty quickly, so I was able to do a few layers of gloss black immediately afterwards. The shininess of the gloss black will help the final silver layer pop. I forgot that the top panel has to be blue as well, so I gave that a base coat of white before doing a top coat of blue. When the black paint had dried, I went over the whole thing with silver rub and buff, which really lends itself to the lived-in, dirty, gritty Star Wars universe. Now, I'm gonna cover up those holes with diffusion paper. I cut it up into smaller pieces and glued them over the holes on the inside of the dome. I'm framing the paper with scrap pieces of foam rather than applying the glue directly to the paper. I'm not sure it could stand up to that. When the hot glue cooled, I trimmed the internal frames and cut a piece of PVC pipe to go over them in the center. This will help the head spin when I eventually get around to building the body. Although I am tempted to just use a Lazy Susan. I think it'll glide better. Ooh, or one of those caster bearings. What are those called? The industrial kind. Then I cut a large circle for the base. I cut a small hole in the center for the PVC pipe to fit through. More important for right now, however, I'm gonna have to cut holes for the car magnets to fit into. So I did that, and now that those are all cut out, I traced a wooden backing. This is necessary to hold the magnets in place because they'll rip right out of the foam otherwise. I cut it up and drilled holes for the screws. Then I cut the center PVC hole. Okay, this is a hole saw. No, battery, you could do it! Well, that's disappointing. While the battery charged up, I sanded the edge smooth on the belt sander. This turned out to be totally unnecessary because I later cut more material from the edge so that it would fit inside the dome. The foam brackets holding in the diffusion paper were getting in the way. Okay, this battery has had 20 minutes. Should be just enough to get through here. Yep. There we go. I carved a third hole into the foam circle so that I'd be able to reach in and tighten the screws if I ever need to. Not looking forward to that. It's a really awkward angle, but I think I can make it work with an Allen key. I hot glued the wood panel onto the foam panel. Then I attached the magnets with matching screws and washers. And finally, I glued the circle base into the dome. So I stared at this for a little while and I wasn't crazy about the light matte blue foam, so I set out to fix it. First I sealed up some of the seams with putty. So because I painted this and not this, there's a little bit of color deviation. And I could get away with that because it's gonna be on top of a car, so no one's gonna see that. But eventually I would like to bring this down to floor level and build the body of the droid, and then it will be seen. And it occurs to me, it's gonna take longer for me to edit this footage than it is for the paint to dry. So let's go ahead and paint the rest of these pieces. Started out with a base coat of white, did each panel on top and around the circumference of the dome, and when they dried, I did a top coat of blue. And when that dried, I was done. I placed it on top of my cart, and now I'm ready to blow up the Death Star. Thanks for watching, everyone. Before I let you go, I just want to point out a few safety tips. If you attempt to try this project yourself, then be sure to resist the urge to put the droid on the hood of your car, like some of the Clone Wars era starfighters. That would be a visual obstruction, and you will get pulled over so fast. These aren't the droids you're looking for.
I'm gonna need you to step out of the car, please.
Move along. Hashtag maker problem. In fact, I wouldn't even drive at highway speed with this on my car. The wind might be able to knock it off. And it's just a missile to the car behind you. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the build. If you didn't, I can't imagine why you would have watched this far. If you want to see me build the rest of the droid, then you can head on over to the Patreon page and join these fine people who make these videos possible. Seriously, that ad revenue is a joke. An enormous amount of work goes into these builds, and they just would not happen without the support of my patrons, who, by the way, receive ad-free early access while ensuring the channel's survival. Because these builds take so long, while I'm working on the next project, you can check out the numerous past builds by following the links, presumably on your screen, and subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of future uploads. Alright, happy crafting. See you later.